Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant for your ears. In the official history books you will find nothing but silence, a void, a polite absence. But in the shadows of 19th century Pennsylvania, in a mansion built on Beacon Hill, 5 brides walked willingly into wealth, into status, into the glittering embrace of Jeremiah Hartwell. And every single one of them emerged broken, hollow, and insane. This was no curse, no accident, no tragic streak of bad luck. It was systematic, it was orchestrated, and it was designed to keep the truth buried behind polished glass and manicured smiles. The story of the Hartwell family is not simply about a man with wealth or a household touched by madness. No, what you are about to hear is the anatomy of psychological control. A blueprint. Hartwell's wives were not merely victims of a strange house or fragile constitutions. They were subjects, experiments, test cases in something far older than psychiatry, far more dangerous than superstition, something ancient that had been refined into the architecture of power, how to break a mind, how to fracture an identity, how to enslave a soul without chains. You think insanity is chaos? No, true insanity, the kind that leaves a woman staring at her own reflection for hours, whispering to someone on the other side of the glass, isn't chaos at all. It is order imposed so brutally that the mind snaps under the weight. Hartwell didn't just marry these women, he inducted them into a system of control that has been perfected for centuries by elites who know the human mind better than any physician. And if you listen closely, you will begin to see that what was done to those 5 wives has been done on a far larger scale to entire societies, entire nations. So imagine it, a towering mansion, 3 stories of imported marble and cherrywood, windows overlooking a valley sunned by smoke from the ironworks. Inside, silence, except for the faint echo of footsteps across the master bedroom suite. A young wife, beautiful, intelligent, alive with promise, sits before a mirror, her smile frozen, her eyes fixed not on herself, but on something, someone, beyond the glass. Within months, she will no longer recognize her husband. Within months, her name will be removed from polite conversation. And within months, another coffin will be lowered into Millbrook Cemetery, while Jeremiah Hartwell remains untouched, untouchable, and perfectly in control. This is not folklore. This is not coincidence. This is the architecture of madness, constructed deliberately, piece by piece. Do you feel that? The first tug on the thread, the quiet suspicion that something is wrong beneath the surface of ordinary history. That is how it begins, not with thunder, but with whispers. The Hartwell story was whispered first, passed between servants who had seen too much, between physicians who dared not record the truth, between neighbors who watched brides vanish into madness like clockwork. And every whisper carried the same poisoned pattern. A young woman entered the master bedroom of that mansion, and soon after her mind began to crack. But let's be clear, this was no fragile accident. These women were not weak, hysterical, or unstable. That was the cover story, the public mask. The truth is far darker. They were chosen. Every bride of Jeremiah Hartwell was handpicked, carefully selected for qualities that made her useful. Intelligence, vitality, sensitivity to the unseen currents of the human psyche. Hartwell was not simply seeking companionship, he was sourcing material, the kind of material institutions, both secret and official, have always needed, minds that could be broken, reshaped, and studied. Why do you think the elite marry in patterns? Why do dynasties repeat the same rituals, the same alliances, generation after generation? It is because marriage has always been a laboratory, a quiet, hidden workshop for control, a place where no witness is needed, because society itself conspires to look away. And in the Hartwell mansion, with its sealed master bedroom and its carefully arranged mirrors, you are looking at one of the earliest American examples of psychological experimentation disguised as domestic tragedy. The townspeople were told these wives were simply delicate, overwhelmed by their new wealth. That is what institutions always do, pathologize the victim to shield the architect. But look closely, and you'll see that what happened inside hose walls mirrors the larger system around you. Mirrors are not just glass, they are tools of self-division. Hartwell's brides began speaking to their reflections. Yes, but isn't that exactly what men are trained to do every day? To live in 2 selves, one public mask and one secret truth, neither of which ever meet without tension. Hartwell's mansion wasn't haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by an idea that reflection itself can be weaponized. Now imagine sitting in that room at night, candles lit, wallpaper breathing shadows, mirrors catching every flicker of light until it seems there are hundreds of versions of you, staring back, whispering, waiting. Would you trust your own mind? Or would you, like Hartwell's brides, start listening to the other selves on the other side of the glass? Margaret Dunlap was the first. 19 years old, the daughter of a respected judge, full of wit and brightness that made her the center of every gathering. When she married Jeremiah Hartwell in 1829, the town saw it as a perfect union, power meeting charm, wealth binding itself to virtue. But perfection has always been a mask, hasn't it? And behind that mask, something else was moving, something that would take Margaret apart piece by piece. At first, her decline looked almost ordinary. Guests noticed her distracted gaze, her habit of staring at the windows for far too long, her sudden silences in the middle of conversations. But the small details revealed something more sinister. She did not look out at the gardens or the sky. She looked into the glass itself, as though the reflection held more life than the world around her. When she finally spoke of it to her sister, she called it the house speaking. Not creaks, not wind, not imagination, the house itself, using its language. Within months, she became obsessed with the master bedroom. No other chamber would do. She insisted it was the only place that felt correct. The servants called it her watching habit, hours upon hours of standing before the mirror, tilting her head, examining her reflection as if it were a stranger. Not vanity, something deeper. She was not admiring herself. She was studying the other. The breaking point came one summer evening during a dinner party. Imagine the scene. A grand dining hall filled with Pittsburgh's elite, silver gleaming, wine poured, the air thick with the smell of roasted lamb. And suddenly, Margaret rose, crossed the room, and began conversing with her reflection in the great mirror. Not muttering, not rambling, conversing. Laughing at replies no one else could hear, arguing with her other self as if it were alive. When Hartwell attempted to intervene, she resisted. Claiming she wasn't finished talking yet. That night she was found tearing wallpaper from the bedroom walls, strip by strip, smiling as if she had uncovered a secret beneath. She told the housekeeper she needed to see what was underneath. There was nothing there, just plaster. Yet she was satisfied, as if knowledge invisible to everyone else had been revealed. This is where truth becomes dangerous. Because what broke Margaret was not merely madness, it was design. The mirrors, the positioning of the furniture, the rituals of the house itself, they were not accidents. They were instruments, and the first subject, Margaret, responded exactly as intended. By the autumn of 1830, Margaret Hartwell's descent was complete. She no longer spoke of her family, her husband, or her future. She spoke only to the mirrors. She gathered them from every corner of the mansion, silver trays, polished candlesticks, even fragments of glass, and arranged them in the master bedroom like sentinels. To the servants it was madness, to Jeremiah it was data. He recorded her words, her gestures, her nightly rituals as though cataloging a scientific experiment. On the final night before her removal, Margaret held what the housekeeper later called a conference. She stood in the center of the master suite, surrounded by dozens of reflective surfaces, each catching the candlelight and multiplying it into 100 trembling versions of her. She spoke to them for hours, pausing, nodding, even laughing at responses no one else could hear. To her, the mirrors were not illusions. They were doors. And behind those doors lived others, other Margarets, more real, she insisted, than the body she wore in this world. By morning, she no longer recognized her husband. She called him an intruder, an observer who doesn't belong. She scratched at the cloths he placed over the mirrors until her fingers bled, and when the physician arrived from Philadelphia, he pronounced what society demanded: nervous exhaustion complicated by melancholia, a polite way of saying broken beyond repair. But here's the part history tried to erase. Margaret did not resist her removal. She stepped into the carriage calmly, whispering over her shoulder to the mirrors she left behind, "I'll be back soon." As if her real family remained in the glass, waiting. She spent the next 43 years confined in an asylum, searching always for reflective surfaces, desperate to resume the dialogue. The town pitied Jeremiah. They saw him as a widower without a wife, a man cursed with misses. fortune. But the details tell a different story. While others grieved, he studied. He sealed the master bedroom, covered the furniture, and pored over medical texts late into the night. His journals from this period, later uncovered, speak not of grief, but of fascination. He wrote of patterns, of thresholds, of the scientific possibilities hidden in reflective distortion. This was no man broken by tragedy. This was an engineer of minds, refining his tools for the next subject. Margaret had been the first test, and Jeremiah Hartwell was only just beginning. 3 years passed before the mansion's east wing was reopened. 3 years of silence, sealed doors, and white sheets covering the master bedroom like a shroud. The townspeople whispered that Jeremiah Hartwell would never remarry, that the tragedy of Margaret's madness had broken him, but they were wrong. He was not broken. He was waiting for the right subject. In 1834 he found her, Elena Rodriguez, the 22-year-old daughter of a Spanish merchant who had recently forged ties with Pittsburgh's industrial barons. Elena was beautiful, yes, but more importantly, she was resilient. Unlike Margaret, she had a confidence that unnerved people. She carried herself with strength, intelligence, and a mind sharp enough to manage her father's accounts. To Hartwell, she was perfect, not simply a wife, but an improved experiment. The wedding was smaller than his first, less ostentatious. Jeremiah no longer needed to impress the town. His position was already unshakable. What mattered was bringing Elena into the mansion, into the chamber that had devoured Margaret. And so, once the vows were sealed, the master bedroom was unlocked, redecorated, and armed once more with mirrors, new wallpaper, new furniture, new reflective surfaces positioned with obsessive precision. It was no bedroom, it was a stage. For months, Elena thrived. She charmed the town's elite, ran the household with grace, and radiated vitality. Visitors admired her warmth and brilliance, but beneath the surface the cracks had already begun. It started with small confessions to her maid Maria, that when she brushed her hair at the vanity, she found herself listening, not to her own thoughts, but to the mirror woman, a presence in the reflection, patient, articulate, and disturbingly knowledgeable about the mansion's secrets. Unlike Margaret, Elena's descent was not frantic. It was calm, rational, and methodical. She claimed the mirror woman gave her advice on how to organize the staff, how to manage the household. She spoke with authority, with certainty, as if her reflection were a mentor rather than a hallucination. Maria's diary captured the chilling detail. Senora Elena no longer looks at the mirror, she looks through it. And Jeremiah? He did not panic. He did not call for physicians or priests. Instead, he observed. He documented every interaction, noting the times of day, the intensity, the patterns of conversation. To him, Elena's unraveling was not tragedy. It was progress. He was no longer watching a wife collapse. He was conducting a study. Because this was never about love, it was about control, and Elena was proving that Margaret's madness was no curse. It was reproducible, predictable, repeatable. By the winter of 1835, Elena was no longer simply conversing with her reflection, she was obeying it. At first, the changes seemed harmless. She rearranged the parlor furniture according to instructions given by the mirror woman. She insisted certain meals be served at precise times, meals chosen not by her appetite, but by whispered commands from the glass. The staff thought it eccentric, perhaps the quirk of a foreign bride adapting to life in Pennsylvania, but Maria, her maid, knew better. Elena's voice would sometimes shift in tone when she repeated what the mirror had said, lower, colder, almost masculine. The danger deepened when the mirror began giving her warnings. "Do not go outside on Tuesdays," she confided to Maria one evening. "The air carries poison then." Another time she refused to sleep, claiming that if she closed her eyes before midnight, she would wake in another place and never return. Maria wrote, "She does not fight these orders. She believes them completely." Jeremiah watched all this with a terrifying calm. His journals reveal how carefully he tracked the evolution. Stage 1, curiosity and conversation. Stage 2, dependence and obedience. Stage 3, full submission. With Margaret, he had only reached the second stage before society intervened, but with Elena, he tightened control. He forbade visits from her family, citing her fragile health. He dismissed staff who questioned her behavior. The mansion became a sealed world, a laboratory where Elena's only voices of authority were Jeremiah and the one inside the mirror. Then came the night she revealed what she had been told, a secret Jeremiah had been waiting to hear. Elena whispered to him during supper that the mirror woman had shown her the others, shapes moving behind the glass, waiting to step through. She described their faces with chilling detail, faces she had never seen in Pittsburgh, but which Jeremiah had drawn in his notebooks years earlier, copied from Margaret's ravings. Elena was not inventing this. She was continuing the same script Margaret had begun. Jeremiah's writings from that month are the most disturbing of all. He did not call her delusional. He called her a vessel. He wrote, "The threshold widens. The mirror does not lie. The subject is prepared." What Elena believed to be a communion was, to Jeremiah, confirmation. The madness was transferable, the vision reproducible. The mirror was not simply a symptom, it was the doorway. Spring came late that year, and with it came blood. On the evening of April 12, 1836, the household gathered for supper. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the dining hall's ornate mirrors. Elena was radiant that night, but her radiance was not human. She seemed electrified, as though a current ran through her veins. Maria later wrote that her mistress ate nothing, only staring into the tall mirror opposite the table, lips moving in silent prayer. Halfway through the meal, Elena rose without warning. She moved to the mirror, lifted a silver carving knife from the table, and pressed it against the skin of her palm. "They require proof," she whispered. "They must taste." Then she cut herself deeply, smearing blood across the glass. The staff gasped in horror, but Jeremiah did not flinch. His eyes gleamed as he leaned forward, watching. Elena's blood clung to the surface in strange web-like patterns. Some swore the reflection moved independently of her body, reaching for the crimson stain like a starving mouth. What happened next silenced the house. A maid named Ruth ran forward to restrain her mistress, but Elena turned, knife still dripping, and plunged it into Ruth's neck with a speed and precision that seemed inhuman. Blood sprayed the wall, pooling beneath the mirror. The room erupted in screams. But Jeremiah, he recorded every detail. In his journal he wrote, "The threshold accepts offering. The subject obeys without hesitation. The mirror does not consume passively, it demands." Elena dropped the knife and fell to her knees, sobbing not from guilt, but from ecstasy. She pressed her bloody hands to her chest, crying, "She is pleased, she is pleased." The staff fled the mansion that night. Only Maria remained, trapped by loyalty and fear, scribbling desperate notes in her diary. She wrote that Jeremiah locked the dining hall for 3 days. When the doors were finally opened, the mirror still bore a dark stain across its surface, though no cleaning rag, no soap could remove it. The glass had swallowed something. From that moment forward, Elena was no longer merely a wife. She was a priestess to the reflection, carrying out its will with unwavering devotion. Jeremiah, far from horrified, welcomed it. His house had become a chapel, his wife, an oracle, his mirrors, altars. And for the second time in his life, a Hartwell bride began her descent into madness. The mansion changed after that night. What had once been a home of industry and family became a sanctuary of reflection, each room a stage for Elena's growing rituals. Jeremiah did not restrain her. He encouraged her, documenting every act as though it were a holy liturgy. The mirrors multiplied. Guests noticed when they still dared to visit. New glass panels appeared in the parlor, in the stairwell, even in the servants' quarters. Each bore the same ornate, hand-carved frames Jeremiah favored, symbols etched in patterns too precise to be decorative. Maria later claimed the symbols resembled ancient alphabets, though she could not name their origin. She said they made her skin crawl. Elena's days became regimented around the mirrors. At dawn, she would bow before the tall hall mirror, whispering greetings to the waiting ones. At noon, she traced the outline of her reflection with her bloodied fingertip, tiny cuts made fresh each day, as though the glass required constant nourishment. At night, she lit candles around the dining hall mirror, chanting until her voice cracked. Maria wrote, "She prays not to God, but to herself, yet it is not herself she sees." By midsummer, Elena began to change physically. Her eyes lost their softness, replaced with a cold, glassy sheen. Servants whispered that she no longer blinked when staring into mirrors. Her skin grew pale, almost translucent, veins appearing like faint blue rivers beneath. When she smiled, it was slow, unnatural, as though her reflection smiled first, and she was only catching up. And then came the most unsettling development. The reflections multiplied. Maria swore she once saw 3 Elenas in the same mirror. one smiling, one weeping, one glaring with fury. Each moved a fraction out of sync, as though vying for dominance. When she told Jeremiah, he dismissed her fear, writing instead, "Proof of layered selves, the glass reveals more than the flesh." Jeremiah began inviting select men, doctors, philosophers, clergy, to witness her trances. Some left shaken, muttering about blasphemy. Others left silent, never returning. A few returned often, whispering with Jeremiah in the library at night, sketching diagrams, mapping Elena's behavior as though she were both specimen and prophet. The Hartwell mansion was no longer isolated madness. It was becoming a cult. And at the center of it, Elena, with blood-stained hands, would place her forehead to the mirror and whisper, "One day I will step through." The townspeople began to notice. At first it was whispers. The Hartwell mansion never slept. Candles burned until dawn, strange chants drifted across the fields, and shadows flickered in windows where no one should have been standing. Farmers claimed their livestock startled at unseen movements near the Hartwell grounds, refusing to graze by the stone walls at night. But then people began to vanish. The first was a stable boy, Thomas Avery. He had been sent to deliver feed, and when he didn't return, his father searched the estate. Maria wrote in her diary that she heard him pounding on the heavy oak doors, screaming his son's name into the night. Jeremiah greeted him calmly, assuring him Thomas had never arrived. Yet Maria swore she had seen the boy earlier that evening, carrying a sack of oats into the stable yard, smiling, alive. 2 weeks later, a seamstress named Lydia disappeared on her way to the Hartwell's home, summoned to alter one of Elena's dresses. Her tools and cloth were found abandoned by the roadside as if dropped mid-step. No trace of her was ever recovered. Rumors spread quickly. The Hartwells were cursed, practicing witchcraft, offering the town's youth to some unseen power. Yet Jeremiah faced no consequences. His wealth, his influence, his calculated poise shielded him. He claimed the accusations were nothing but rural hysteria, the backward suspicion of those who could not comprehend progress and study. Inside the mansion, Maria documented what no outsider could see. Elena's ceremonies had grown elaborate. Once solitary prayers before a mirror had become full rituals. Jeremiah gathered his observers, a handful of curious intellectuals who now behaved less like guests and more like initiates. Together they would sit in silence as Elena performed. She no longer cut only herself. Small animals, rabbits, doves, even a lamb, were offered to the mirrors. Their blood smeared on glass did not drip naturally. It spread, thin and deliberate, like fingers pulling the crimson deeper into the reflection. Maria described the sound it made, a sucking, a wet sigh, as though the mirror drank. Jeremiah called it consumption, Elena called it feeding, and the missing townsfolk. Maria dared not ask, but she remembered the look in Elena's eyes during one midnight rite. Wild, luminous, fixed not on her reflection but on something behind it, something waiting. The Hartwell mansion had become a mouth, and it was hungry. By autumn of 1847, fear in the village hardened into resolve. Too many had gone missing, too many nights filled with chants and flickering lights in the Hartwell windows. The people gathered in the church basement, whispering of sin, witchcraft, and devilry. Some urged patience. Jeremiah was powerful, his word carried weight in Richmond and beyond. But others, fueled by grief and superstition, demanded action. One night, a small group of men, farmers, blacksmiths, and one preacher, armed themselves with lanterns, axes, and shotguns. They marched up the winding path to the Hartwell estate. The mansion loomed above them, its many windows glowing faintly as though lit from beneath, not within. Maria, writing later, recalled the moment vividly. They came like judges, but it was they who trembled. They thought they sought a woman's madness. They did not know they were approaching a temple. Inside, Jeremiah welcomed them with unnerving calm. He stood in the great hall, flanked by two of his observers, men of learning who now seemed like acolytes. Elena was not present, but the mirrors were. Dozens of them covering nearly every wall, their surfaces shifting with candlelight. Some swore the glass rippled as though stirred by unseen hands. The men accused Jeremiah outright: sorcery, abduction, consorting with demons. Jeremiah only smiled and invited them deeper into the house. Against their better instincts, they followed. He led them into the dining hall, where a massive mirror stretched from floor to ceiling. Before it knelt Elena, pale as alabaster, whispering in a voice not quite her own. At her side lay an empty dressmaker's kit, the missing Lydia's belongings. The farmers froze. Then the mirror moved. Maria wrote, "It was not a reflection, but a door of water, something pressed against the other side, a hand, too long, too thin, its fingers bending like reeds. The glaze bowed outward, straining against its frame, as though eager to release what lay within." The men panicked. One fired his shotgun. The blast shattered part of the mirror, sending shards across the floor. Elena screamed, not in fear, but in anguish, as though her own body had been torn. Blood blossomed across her arms, though no wound was visible. Jeremiah, furious, declared, "You fools, you've blinded the window." The intruders fled, some swearing never to speak of what they'd seen, yet the story spread nonetheless, fueling hysteria in the town. But those who returned home swore something darker, that when they looked into their own mirrors that night, their reflections lingered a moment too long. The following weeks brought a strange paralysis over the village. On one hand, the townspeople whispered of storming the Hartwell estate once and for all, tearing down the mirrors and driving the family out. On the other hand, fear clamped down on their courage. Those who had stormed the mansion swore they'd felt watched ever since. Their barns creaked at night. Their children spoke of faces in the window that vanished when lamps were lit, and every mirror in their homes seemed to hold a breath too long before returning their reflections. The preacher who had led the charge grew sickly, his eyes hollowing, his sermons faltering. Maria noted in her journal, "They struck a blow, but they carried something back with them. The mirrors are not only here, they are wherever there is glass, wherever the eye dares to look." Inside the Hartwell home, Elena was changing. Her body grew frail, her eyes fever-bright, and yet her voice carried with unnatural authority. She no longer called the figures in the glass reflections, she named them. To Maria, she whispered, "They are kin, bound in the deep. They hunger because we have starved them." Jeremiah encouraged it. He began arranging the mirrors in new formations, entire hallways of silver and glass, corridors where one could walk and see not their own body but dozens of pale, watching forms peering back, their mouths moving though no sound escaped. It was Maria who overheard Elena one night, not praying but bargaining. She pressed her palm against the largest mirror in the dining hall and murmured, "Soon, soon I will cross, and when I do, you will give them back to me. The children, the servants, the ones they think are lost, they will walk with me again." Maria felt her stomach turn. The missing townsfolk, the vanished children, Elena had not killed them. She had delivered them into what Maria could not grasp. Meanwhile, rumors thickened in the village, livestock butchered without explanation, wells fouled by black silt, strange cries drifting from the forest at night. Every tale found its way back to the Hartwells. The people spoke of fire, of torches, of ending it all before the darkness spread. But Maria knew the truth. They were already too late. The mirrors were not waiting anymore. They were beckoning. By the winter of 1847, the village could no longer tolerate silence. Fear had hardened into desperation. A town council was called, though it resembled less a meeting than a tribunal. Farmers, widows, and blacksmiths gathered by candlelight, speaking in low voices of the Hartwells. The missing had grown too many. Children vanished from their beds. Animals were found bloodless in the fields. And always, in whispered testimony, came the same refrain, "The mirrors. It is the mirrors." They resolved upon fire. The Hartwell mansion would be razed, its windows shattered, its foundations salted. They believed, perhaps naively, that if the house was destroyed, so too would be the curse. Maria, hidden in her attic room, heard fragments of their plotting through an open window. Yet when she told Elena, her mistress only smiled. "They cannot burn what is not of this world. Fire does not touch glass, it only makes it shine brighter." That night, Elena stood before her grand mirror in the dining hall, dressed in white as though for some ceremony. She pressed her forehead to the cold surface, whispering, "If they come, I will step through. I will not be taken from you. Not again." Maria shivered as she watched, for she thought only for a moment that the mirror pressed back. The villagers chose the new moon for their assault, believing the darkness would shield them. Torches and pitchforks in hand, they gathered in the field below the estate. One carried a Bible, another an axe still stained from slaughtering pigs, another a pouch of salt. To them, this was not an attack on a family, but a cleansing, an exorcism by fire. But Maria's account diverges sharply from what the official records later claimed. The official story speaks of a simple fire, a home that burned with its inhabitants trapped inside, yet Maria described something else, a night when fire was not the only thing alive in the Hartwell home. As the villagers advanced, Elena stood waiting in the great hall. Jeremiah beside her, Maria hidden in the shadows. The mirrors glowed faintly, pulsing as though alive. The air itself grew heavy, charged with an unnatural stillness. Then came the first torch, hurled through a window. The curtains ignited, flames licking upward. The people cheered outside. But Maria wrote. The mirrors began to hum, and in their depths faces opened their eyes. The flames spread quickly, devouring curtains, banisters, and woodwork with a hungry roar. Outside, the villagers shouted with triumph, believing their torment at last undone. But Maria, crouched in the shadows of the hall, knew immediately that something was wrong. The mirrors did not shatter under the heat. They sang. It began as a low vibration, like the strings of a great instrument pulled taut. Glass trembled, not cracking, but resonating. Then the surfaces rippled, as if they were water, and within them the pale faces, long hidden, now pressed forward, more distinct, more real than ever before. Dozens, then hundreds of them, men, women, children, all wearing expressions of hunger and expectation. Jeremiah knelt, arms lifted as though in worship, whispering, "They are awake." Elena stood at the heart of the inferno, her white dress already darkening with soot. She raised her hands to the tallest mirror, its frame blackened by smoke, and cried out, take me now before the fire consumes us." And the mirror opened, not shattered, not broken, but opened, like a door sliding back into an endless depth. Wind poured from it, cold and fetid, carrying whispers that no living tongue could form. The torches of the villagers outside guttered, as if smothered by invisible hands. The first of the pale figures stepped through. Maria described it as neither man nor ghost, but a body stretched thin, its eyes like empty sockets filled with glimmering frost. Its skin clung too tightly, its jaw unhinged wider than it should. It crawled onto the burning floor, and though fire licked at its limbs, it did not burn. The villagers outside screamed as more came forth, shapes pulling themselves through the mirrors one after another, endless, relentless. What had been intended as a night of vengeance became a night of slaughter. Maria remembered the sound most vividly, not the call of flames, not the shouts of men, but the glass humming and ringing like 1,000 unseen bells. The fire had not destroyed the mirrors, it had awakened them, and in that chaos she swore she saw Elena smile. The courtyard outside the Hartwell estate became a battlefield. Villagers swung axes, hurled stones, and prayed loudly as if their words alone could wound the pale figures spilling from the flames. Yet no prayer stopped them, no axe bit deep. Every blow landed as though against smoke, only for the creatures to reform, unfazed, their hollow eyes locking onto the living. Some tried to flee back down the hill, but the mirrors, still intact even as fire devoured the house, threw out sudden flashes of light, blinding those who turned away. Maria swore the glass itself wanted witnesses, that it refused to let anyone turn their back. Inside, she clung to the stairwell banister, coughing as the smoke thickened. Elena remained upright in the great hall, her white dress now glowing faintly in the glass light, like a bride before an altar. Jeremiah stayed kneeling, arms outstretched, his body trembling with devotion. The creatures did not harm them, but the villagers outside were torn apart. One was dragged halfway into a mirror before the glass sealed around him like water freezing shut. Another was lifted bodily into the air, his limbs snapping as though pulled by unseen strings. His screams were swallowed into the chorus of glass humming. Maria could not move. Terror held her like chains, yet her eyes caught something the others missed. Amidst the fire and blood, one mirror on the far wall did not shimmer like the rest. Instead, its surface remained still, reflecting only flame and shadow. For the first time since she had been in the Hartwell home, it looked like nothing more than a mirror. A thought gripped her. Perhaps this was her only escape. But Elena saw her staring. Slowly the mistress turned, soot streaking her face, eyes shining with feverish clarity. "No, child," she whispered through the smoke. "Not that way. The mirrors choose who may pass, and you are not see. Hosen." Maria's hands tightened on the banister. Was it true, or was Elena merely keeping her bound in this nightmare? A crash shook the house. A burning beam collapsed, scattering embers across the hall. The fire was spreading faster than the creatures could crawl, yet the mirrors glowed brighter, as though feeding on the destruction. And then, a voice. Low, deep, resonant, not from Elena, not from Jeremiah, but from the glass itself. She belongs here. Maria staggered back. For the first time the mirrors had spoken directly, and the words were about her. Maria's heart pounded so violently she thought the mirrors could hear it. The words, "She belongs here," did not echo like sound, but pressed inside her skull, vibrating through her bones. It was not speech, but a command written into her very blood. Elena stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly with the reflected firelight. "Do you hear it now?" she said, almost tenderly. "They have claimed you, just as they claimed me, just as they claimed every soul who came before." Maria shook her head, coughing, fighting for breath in the smoke. "No, I am not yours, I am not theirs." But the mirrors disagreed. Their surfaces rippled and shapes inside leaned forward, pressing pale hands against the glass as if eager to reach her. Each reflection of Maria bent slightly wrong, her smile too wide, her eyes too hollow, her face not her own but theirs, waiting to be worn. Jeremiah rose unsteadily to his feet, his face streaked with soot and sweat, his voice cracked with both awe and exhaustion. "The glass has spoken. She is chosen. She must stay." The villagers' screams outside grew fewer, fainter. Either they had fled, or they had been taken. The flames devoured what was left of the hall, but the mirrors did not burn. Instead, the fire only revealed them more sharply, as though the house itself were nothing but a cocoon, meant to keep them hidden until tonight. Maria's eyes darted to the one still mirror, the only one that looked ordinary. A single chance, a single hope. But the voice returned, sharper this time, resonating through every surface of glass. No escape. The force of it bent the air, and shards of glass fell from the ceiling, though no mirrors had broken. The still mirror wavered, its surface darkening, and Maria realized it was not an escape at all. It was a snare. Her mind split with panic. Run into the fire and die in the flames, or surrender to the glass and live at something less than human. And then, through the haze, she saw movement. Small, human, trembling. A child's figure peering from behind a fallen beam. One of the servants' children. Alive. The mirrors had not noticed it yet. Maria's choice became clear. Not escape, not surrender, but defiance. She moved. Maria lunged toward the beam, her skirts catching on the broken wood, her hands burning as she pulled herself through the smoke. The child's wide eyes locked on hers, eyes full of terror, not understanding the voices, only the fire. "Come here," Maria hissed, reaching out. The child hesitated, glancing toward the mirrors where pale faces pressed closer against the glass, their fingers leaving streaks as though oil bled from their skin. A low groan rolled through the hall, like the house itself protesting. The mirrors had noticed. Jeremiah cried out behind her. "No, she is chosen, not the child. Do not anger them." His voice was madness, half worship, half terror. But Maria ignored him. She tore the child free, pulling the little body into her arms. The boy buried his face into her shoulder, whimpering, clutching her dress with tiny fists. The mirrors reacted at once. Their surfaces rippled like storm water. Dozens of pale arms reached outward, stretching farther than before. For the first time, they were not content to wait. They were coming through. Elena did not move to stop them. She stood still as the fire coiled around her gown, smiling faintly, as if she welcomed the inevitable. "Run if you wish," she whispered. Her voice carried strangely clear through the crackling. "The glass will find you. Wherever you go, it always finds its own." Maria staggered toward the staircase, the child heavy in her arms, her lungs filling with smoke. But the steps were already aflame, collapsing one by one into an inferno. The main door was gone, swallowed by fire and falling timber. That left only the windows. But each pane was framed by mirrors, every one of them alive, pulsing with hungry light. The boy whimpered again. Maria pressed his face against her shoulder, shielding his eyes from the horrors around them. She would not let him see what she saw, reflections crawling, twisting, writhing into shapes that resembled people she once knew, neighbors, fellow servants, even her own mother. All of them stood inside the glass, whispering soundless pleas. Her mind screamed, "Not them, not me, not him." The fire roared, the mirrors surged, and Maria made her choice. She tightened her hold on the boy, turned away from the glowing glass, and hurled herself toward the nearest burning window. The sound of shattering filled the hall, not only of glass, but of voices breaking. Maria crashed through the burning window, glass slicing into her arms and smoke tearing at her throat. The child screamed, but she clutched him tight, rolling onto the scorched earth outside. The night air hit her lungs like ice after fire, but it carried no comfort, for the village was not silent. All around, the survivors of the blaze stood in the open fields, their faces pale in the moonlight. But something was wrong. They did not move. Their bodies swayed faintly, like reeds in wind that did not exist. Their eyes, every single one, shone faintly with reflection. Not firelight, mirror light. Maria staggered to her feet, holding the boy. He was crying now, but softly, as if even he sensed that loudness might draw them closer. The Hartwell hall behind her burned, timbers collapsing inward, yet its mirrors still gleamed through the smoke, unbroken, unharmed. Their glow stretched outward, bleeding into the villagers, threading through them as though invisible cords tethered every soul to the glass. A whisper drifted across the field, not from the people's lips, but from within them. "She runs. She carries what is ours." Maria's knees buckled. The boy clung to her, his tiny fingers digging into her skin. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, slowed, as though the mirrors were not behind her, but inside her, dragging her down with each step. Then one of the villagers, a woman she knew, Mrs. Carrow, whose daughter had died in infancy, tilted her head unnaturally far back. From her open mouth spilled not breath but light, cold and silver. Her body shuddered, and when she looked forward again, Maria saw not Mrs. Carrow's face, but her own reflection staring back. Dozens more followed, faces shifting, mouths spilling silver light, until Maria stood surrounded by a field of living mirrors. The boy whimpered again. Maria crouched, clutching him close. "Don't look at two." Him," she whispered fiercely. "Whatever happens, don't look." But how could she protect him? Where could she go, when even the living had become glass? And then, through the ranks of shimmering villagers, she saw Elena, unburned, untouched, walking calmly through the field as if the fire had never licked her dress. Her eyes gleamed brighter than all the rest, and her smile was patient, inevitable. "Maria," she called softly, her voice carrying like silk across the night. "You were never meant to run." The circle closed. Maria's pulse thundered in her ears as Elena stepped closer, her white dress unsoiled, her hair untouched by ash or flame. Around them the villagers swayed like husks, their eyes reflecting the burning ruins of the Hartwell estate in cold silver. Maria shifted the child behind her, whispering, "Don't move, don't breathe." But the boy's small body trembled uncontrollably. She knew they had only moments. Elena stopped just a few feet away, her smile fixed, her voice smooth as oil poured into water. "You think you carry him to safety. He was never yours to save. The child belongs to the glass. All of you do." Maria tightened her grip on a jagged shard of window glass still lodged in her palm. The blood that dripped from her hand gleamed faintly, unnaturally bright, as if even her wound was being claimed by the mirror's hunger. She lifted the shard. "Then perhaps it's the glass that must bleed." Elena's smile faltered. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her face. Maria acted. With a cry torn from the very pit of her lungs, she slashed the shard across her arm, letting her blood spray onto the ground. The soil hissed where it struck, smoke rising as if the earth itself recoiled from the contamination. But the villagers froze, their swaying halted, their reflective eyes flickering with static, as though Maria's act had scrambled their tether. Elena's voice sharpened, no longer soft but venomous. "Do not resist. You cannot sever what is bound." But Maria pressed harder, dragging the glass deeper across her skin. The pain was blinding, but as her blood poured freely, the air shuddered. The mirrors in the burning hall cracked, not shattered, but webbed with fractures, their once perfect surfaces trembling as though fighting against rupture. The villagers screamed, their voices no longer their own, but a chorus of breaking glass. Some fell to their knees. So, lutching their faces, light spilling from their mouths in ragged bursts. The boy sobbed into her dress, but Maria felt it, the mirror's grip loosening. For the first time since stepping into that cursed house, she sensed they could be fought. Elena's eyes burned like twin shards of ice. She raised her arms, her calm mask gone, her voice a shriek. Then bleed yourself dry, Maria. See if the earth catches you before the glass swallows what you love. The night quaked. The boy clung tighter, his sobs muffled against Maria's blood-soaked dress. She staggered forward, glass shard still in hand, her vision tunneling between the burning ruins and Elena's terrible glow. The villagers convulsed, caught between two masters, their bodies twitching like marionettes whose strings were being yanked in opposite directions. Their screams came out as broken echoes, voices splitting into two tones at once, one pleading for release, the other demanding obedience. Maria's blood pooled at her feet, sizzling against the dirt, the stench of iron thick in the air. She felt her strength slipping, her hands shook, but she also saw the fractures spreading wider through the mirrors. Their surfaces no longer sang, they howled, vibrating with an agonized fury that set her teeth on edge. Elena advanced, her expression no longer serene but twisted with desperation. You cannot hold against them. One woman cannot fight an ocean. They will drink you dry, and when they do, even your soul will feed their hunger. Maria raised her shard defiantly, then let them choke on me. With the last of her strength, she hurled herself toward the tallest mirror, the one that had birthed the first pale figure. She plunged the bloodied shard deep into its center. The effect was instant. The mirror shrieked. Not in sound, but in vibration so violent it rattled every bone in her body. The glass webbed with fractures, light gushing out in molten ribbons. The villagers collapsed, their silver-lit eyes extinguishing one by one. The pale figures clawing from the glass shrieked as cracks swallowed their bodies, pulling them back into the void. Elena screamed Maria's name, not in triumph but in terror. She reached out, her fingers stretching impossibly long, desperate to stop her. But as the mirror ruptured, a blast of searing white light consumed the hall. Maria shielded the boy with her body. She felt her flesh sear, felt her heartbeat thunder until it seemed ready to burst. And then, silence. No flames, no screams, only the ringing of broken glass scattered across scorched earth. When Maria opened her eyes, she lay in the ruins of the Hartwell estate, the boy still clinging to her. The mirrors were gone, reduced to glittering dust. The villagers lay unconscious or dead, their faces slack and empty, freed or emptied forever. Elena was nowhere to be seen, but Maria knew this was not the end. Something had slipped through, something unseen, and it was watching her even now. Morning broke over the ruins of the Hartwell estate with an uncanny stillness. Smoke rose in thin, crooked columns. Birds would not approach. Even the wind seemed unwilling to cross the scorched threshold. Maria staggered through the wreckage, her skin blistered, her dress torn into rags. The boy clung to her hand, silent now, not from calm but from shock so deep his eyes looked hollow. She wanted to weep, to collapse beside the ash and broken beams, but the silence pressed against her, commanding her to move. The villagers were scattered across the ground. Some were alive, groaning faintly, as if waking from a fever dream. Others lay lifeless, their eyes glazed, bodies twisted in unnatural angles. What struck Maria most was their faces, every expression slack, as though something essential had been drained. She searched desperately for Elena. There was no body, no bones, no trace of her white dress. It was as if she had been claimed by the mirrors themselves, carried into the void before the final collapse. Maria shuddered, knowing absence could be more terrifying than a corpse. Then she noticed it. Among the rubble, scattered like the remnants of shattered stars, were fragments of mirror. Not glass, not any more, but glimmering pieces of something alive. They pulsed faintly, catching the light in ways that twisted the air around them. When Maria's gaze lingered too long, the reflections within shifted. She thought she saw faces, eyes, fingers stretching outward. The boy whispered hoarsely, "Don't look at them." She grabbed his shoulders. "You saw it too?" He nodded, tears forming again. "They're not gone. They're waiting." Maria wrapped the fragments in a torn piece of cloth and buried them beneath the ruined floorboards. It was a feeble act, she knew, like trying to cover a wound with ash, but she could not leave them exposed. As the sun rose higher, the survey, Ivers stirred, Confusion etched their faces. None remembered the slaughter, none recalled the mirrors. They spoke of fire, of dreams, of waking in a field of smoke. When Maria tried to explain, they only stared blankly, as though her words were nonsense. She realized with growing horror that the truth belonged to her alone. The memory of that night, the faces, the glass, Elena's choice, had been branded into her mind, but erased from everyone else. And that, she thought, was the cruelest trick of all. In the weeks that followed, the village carried on as if nothing had happened. The Hartwell estate remained a ruin, charred beams jutting skyward like the ribs of some dead beast. But no one spoke of the night. Children played in the streets, men returned to their fields, women gathered in the market, trading bread and gossip. Maria watched them with growing dread. How could they move so easily through the shadow of what she had seen? Their silence wasn't innocence, it was erasure. Something had taken the memory from them, leaving only her and the boy to bear the truth. At night, Maria began to dream again, not of fire, not of Elena, but of mirrors. She saw endless corridors lined with glass, each pane reflecting not herself but others. Her face twisted into anguish, her body crumpled in despair, her hands bloodied as though she had committed acts she could not remember. Each time she woke, her skin burned with sweat, her breath sharp and ragged. The boy was not spared. His screams pierced the nights, waking Maria in terror. When she rushed to him, he would only shake his head violently, clutching at his chest as though he had swallowed a shard of glass that refused to pass. He would not speak of his dreams, but Maria did not press him. She already knew. The ruins of the estate became a place of pilgrimage for the curious. Some villagers crept there under cover of night, daring each other to touch the scorched stones. Maria followed once, unseen, and watched as they gathered around the foundation where she had buried the fragments. Their torches flickered, their faces seemed softer, pliant, as though they were slipping into trance. She clenched her fists. They didn't remember, but something inside them did. The mirrors had marked them. That night, Maria returned alone to the ruins, digging frantically with her bare hands until her nails cracked and bled. The cloth she had buried was gone. Only a hollow space remained, empty, yet humming faintly, as if the ground itself was still breathing. The realization clawed at her throat. She hadn't contained the curse. She had merely delayed it. When she turned to leave, she saw something glimmer at the edge of her vision. In the blackened wood of a beam, a reflection blinked back at her, her own face smiling, though she was not. Maria stumbled backward, heart pounding. The curse was not buried, it had spread. By dawn, Maria understood what had begun. The curse was no longer contained within the Hartwell estate. It was everywhere. She saw it in the way the villagers moved, their gestures subtly altered, their laughter hollow, repeating like echoes rather than true sound. Faces looked familiar, yet when she gazed too long, details shifted, the curve of a cheekbone, the angle of a smile. The boy noticed it too. One morning he clutched her sleeve and whispered, "They're not the same." His voice trembled, and Maria could see the whites of his eyes flashing, restless like a trapped animal. He pointed toward the blacksmith, a man Maria had known her whole life, but when she looked, her blood chilled. The man's eyes caught the light strangely, reflecting not fire, but glass. That night, Maria tested her fear. She brought a small mirror from her cupboard, cracked at the edge but still functional, and held it before her neighbor when she came to borrow salt. For the briefest instant, the reflection faltered. Her neighbor's face warped into something pale and unfamiliar, a mask stretched thin over emptiness. Then, as quickly as it had come, the image snapped back. Maria nearly dropped the mirror. Her neighbor smiled, thanked her, and walked away as though nothing had passed. But Maria knew. The village was no longer populated by villagers. Something else had entered them. The boy refused to sleep after that. He sat up each night, staring into the dark as if afraid the walls themselves would turn transparent. "They're watching us," he whispered again and again, "through everything." Maria didn't argue. She had begun to feel it too. A sensation like a gaze pressing against her skin, not from a person, but from the air itself. The glass had seeped into wood, into water, into eyes. Every reflection became a doorway, and every doorway looked back. One evening, Maria returned from the well. Ellen found her own reflection waiting for her in the bucket, but it did not move as she did. It smiled when she did not. It mouthed words she did not speak, and then, slowly, deliberately, It reached out a hand from the surface of the water. Maria dropped the bucket and fled, her body shaking. She realized then what the Hartwells had discovered. Once the mirrors chose a vessel, it was only a matter of time. The reflection was not content with watching, it wanted entry. The first disappearance came quietly. A farmer named Ellis, broad-shouldered, steady, the sort of man no one expected to simply vanish, was gone by morning. His wife swore she had seen him rise from bed at dawn, wash his face in the basin and mutter something about tending the fields, but he never reached them. His boots remained at the door, his tools still neatly set out, untouched. When the villagers gathered to search, Maria noticed something the others did not. The basin of water Ellis had used still rippled faintly, though no hand disturbed it. She leaned closer, and her heart faltered. In the reflection, Ellis's face hovered, not distorted, not ghostly, but clear and sharp, as if he were crouched just beneath the surface, staring upward. His lips moved in silence. Maria staggered back, bile rising in her throat. No one else seemed to see it. They spoke of wolves, of bandits, of Ellis wandering off into the woods. Only Maria and the boy knew the truth. Ellis hadn't left. He had been taken inside. That night, Maria placed a cloth over every mirror in her house, turned every vessel of water face down, and refused to let even a sliver of glass remain uncovered. But it did not matter. The reflections found her anyway, in the polished handle of a pan, in the faint sheen of her window after rain, in the child's wide, terrified eyes. Ellis was there, mouthing the same words again and again. The boy finally whispered, "Do you hear him?" Maria pressed her ear close to the reflective surface of the pan. At first there was nothing, only her ragged breathing. Then, faint as a breath behind glass, came a voice. "Let me out." Her skin crawled. Ellis's reflection blinked. The villagers continued to vanish in the days that followed. Each time there was no struggle, no sound, only a residue left in glass. And each time, Maria wondered, was it truly Ellis's soul trapped behind the surface? Or was it the mirror itself wearing his likeness, baiting them into sympathy? The boy clutched her hand tighter with each passing night. "It's choosing them one by one," he said, "and when it's finished with them, it will come for us." Maria did not doubt him. Maria began to notice the delays. At first, she thought it was her mind, worn, stretched, brittle from sleepless nights. But no, the reflections were no longer synchronized. When she raised her hand, the mirror hesitated, catching up a heartbeat too late. When she whispered a prayer, she saw her mouth move in glass a fraction slower, as though her reflection were thinking before imitating. It was not copying, it was studying. By the third night, the differences grew bolder. Maria stood before her window, the moonlight pouring pale across her face. In the glass, her reflection did not mirror her at all. It tilted its head to one side, curious, patient, its lips curled into a smile she did not make. Her stomach dropped. The boy had been right. The mirrors were rehearsals. The figures within them practiced every gesture, every word, until they knew their hosts better than the flesh knew itself. Then, once perfected, they stepped forward, leaving the true body hollow. Maria tested it. She lifted her hand quickly, faster than instinct. Her reflection anticipated her, rising an instant before she moved. She dropped the pan to the floor, heart hammering. The boy's voice came from behind her. "They don't just want to look like us. They want to be us." Maria turned. For a moment she swore the boy's reflection in the window was smiling, though the boy himself was not. Her breath caught. "Don't look at it," she whispered, clutching his shoulders. "Don't ever look too long." But the truth was crushing her. The mirror was no longer an object. It was a mouth, wide and patient, rehearsing her very soul. And when it grew tired of waiting, it would not take her face, her body, her blood. It would take her will. And when it did, who would know the difference? Maria could no longer trust her own skin. It began with small lapses. She would reach for a candle, only to find it already lit. She would hum an old hymn beneath her breath, then hear the melody continuing a second longer after she stopped. Once, while kneeling to pray, she opened her eyes and found the boy staring at her, not with comfort, not with trust, but with suspicion, as though he were measuring whether she was still herself. The worst came one morning, when she caught sight of her reflection in a shard of broken mirror she had forgotten to cover. She froze. The face staring back was hers, same eyes, same scar along her chin, yet it lingered, watching, even after she stepped aside. Her stomach twisted violently. The boy whispered from behind, his voice trembling, "How do I know it's you?" Maria turned, aghast. "Of course it's me. Who else?" But she stopped. Because hadn't she wondered the same? Hadn't she woken in the night unsure if the hand clutching the bedsheet was her own, or the hand of something rehearsed, practiced, perfected? Her voice cracked. If I wasn't, how would you know?" The boy said nothing. He only held a shard of glass between his fingers, turning it so that her reflection warped, stretched, and grinned. Maria felt the walls closing in. If the mirrors were rehearsals, then perhaps her double had already stepped forward. Perhaps the boy wasn't watching her at all. Perhaps he was trapped with her reflection, while the real Maria was already gone, folded neatly behind the surface. And a darker thought gnawed at her. Maybe she would never know the difference. Maybe the only one who could tell had already decided she was not real. The boy lowered the shard slowly, his eyes wet and unblinking. "If it isn't you," he whispered, "then I'll have to end it before it learns too much." Maria's breath caught in her throat, because in that moment she wasn't entirely sure she could argue with him. The boy devised a test. He said nothing at first, only placed the shard of glass on the table between them. Its fractured surface caught the candlelight, scattering her face into a dozen jagged fragments. Maria stared at them, horrified to see that not all of the pieces moved when she did. Some lingered, delayed, as though caught in a thought too slow for flesh. "Say something only you would know," the boy demanded. His voice cracked with fear, but beneath it burned a steel resolve. Maria's lips trembled. She thought of prayers, of childhood hymns, of her mother's lullabies. Yet each word that rose in her throat felt counterfeit, as though the glass had rehearsed them already. She clutched her chest, shaking her head. The boy leaned closer, his shadow trembling on the wall. "If you can't prove it, then you're not her." Maria felt the sting of betrayal, though she understood. He had seen too much, lived too long in the company of mirrors. To him, trust was now a knife poised at the throat. She whispered, "Do you think I'd still fight if I wasn't me? Do you think I'd still try to protect you?" But even as she said it, the reflection in the shard smiled differently, cold, confident. It mouthed words she hadn't spoken. Yet the boy leaned toward that voice, as if hypnotized. Maria slapped the shard away. It shattered across the floor, spilling a dozen smaller faces that flickered like trapped insects. The boy recoiled, wide-eyed, uncertain which Maria stood before him now. And that was when the true horror struck her. The mirrors didn't have to replace her entirely. They only had to sow doubt, fracture faith, leave her so questioned and unproven that the boy would finish the work himself. Maria's throat went dry. She realized the mirrors weren't only rehearsals, they were trials, and she was failing hers. The whispers began that night. Maria and the boy had tried to sleep, but the room itself betrayed them. From every shard, every darkened pane of glass, came voices, soft at first, like breath fogging the air, then clearer, sharper, layered over one another until they became unbearable. "She is not yours. This one breathes differently." Her eyes blinked slower than they should. Maria pressed her palms to her ears, but the sound wasn't heard. It was felt. It rippled beneath her skin, shuddered through her teeth. The boy, pale and rigid, clutched his knees and rocked, as if trying to escape a lullaby sung just for him. Then came the worst. The mirrors stopped whispering and began answering. From the largest shard near the door, Maria's face leaned out, speaking with her voice but not her heart. "I am the real one. She has been rehearsed too long. Look, she stumbles, she doubts, she hesitates." The boy's head snapped up, eyes darting between Maria and her reflection. His lips quivered, caught in the pull of two competing truths. Another shard joined in, another Maria, and another. Soon the room was filled with versions of her, overlapping, arguing, twisting every memory, every gesture, until even Maria herself faltered. The boy stood suddenly, his fists clenched, his face wet with sweat and tears. "If you are real," he whispered, "prove it, right now, or I'll end both of you." Maria's chest tightened. How could she prove she was herself when every word, every movement was stolen the moment it left her body? The reflections leaned closer, their voices in perfect harmony now. "You will never prove it, not to him, not to yourself." The boy raised his hand. In it, the shard gleamed like a blade. Maria realized in that instant her trial was no longer about survival. It was about convincing a child who had seen too much that she was still worth believing in, and she had only seconds left before the glass decided for him. The moment stretched like a taut wire. The boy's hand trembled, the shard catching the candlelight as if eager for blood. Around them the mirrored faces leaned in, grinning, chanting now in unison, "Strike! Strike! Strike!" Maria's breath came fast and shallow. She could feel the pull. The easy answer would be to run, to plead, to fall to her knees, but that would only confirm the mirror's accusations. She understood then. Fear was their script, doubt was their stage. Every hesitation gave them more power. So she did the only thing left. She stepped forward. "Then do it," she said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the boys. "If I am false, kill me. If I am true, you'll know the difference the moment you strike." The room fell silent. Even the mirrors stilled, their mouths frozen mid-whisper. The boy's lip quivered, his chest heaving. He had been prepared for begging, for denial, for weakness, but not this. The shard trembled in his grip. His gaze darted between the countless Marias, the confident ones, the smirking ones, the accusing ones, and the single woman before him who had dared to call their bluff. And then, with a cry torn from the deepest wound of his soul, he hurled the shard at the wall. It shattered into dust, spraying light across the room like dying stars. The reflections screamed, their faces rippling, cracking, breaking apart until only darkness remained. Silence returned. The boy collapsed to the floor, sobbing into his hands. Maria knelt beside him, pulling him close. She could feel his small body shake, the weight of years of torment breaking loose at once. For the first time, there was no echo, no second voice, no mirrored rehearsal, only his cries and her heartbeat and the fragile truth of being alive. Maria closed her eyes. She knew this was not the end. The mirrors were patient and doubt would return, but tonight she had chosen courage over rehearsal, and that choice had saved them both.